1. This story aims to remind you that not all individuals acting in a creepy way are malicious, or even trying to be creepy. Here's some information about myself for context. I'm a 19-year-old hobbyist photographer, 18 when this incident occurred, and I'm a tall and skinny guy at 6'2". When I go out to take pictures, I don't have access to a car or bike, restricting my potential photo ops to things that are within a walking distance of my house. Living in a large suburb with few parks, I've learned to appreciate the beauty of small, easy-to-find animals such as grasshoppers and spiders. So most of the time when I go out to take pictures, I'm wandering the neighborhood to look for cats to pet and insects to photograph. Most of the time I end up on the cul-de-sac adjacent to mine because one of my neighbors owns outdoor cats I like to visit, and because there are tons of flowers along that street that attract beautiful insects. Despite being an introvert, I have become acquaintances with a number of my neighbors, including some living on the adjacent cul-de-sac, since I've been walking there for a few years now. Context aside, the day of this incident was the first time in a few weeks that I had gone out to take pictures. I searched for the cats and found that they weren't hanging out on the lawn in front of their house that day, so I started walking along the sidewalk to a house across the street. This particular house always has grasshoppers and butterflies in their overgrown front yard, so I always stopped by to look for some. The earlier mentioned insect attracting flowers are in this yard, but the ones near the sidewalk had all withered. I saw that there were some healthier flowers a few steps into the yard, so I stepped over the plants until I was in the middle of the small yard. Unfortunately, there were no insects out today either. As I looked up from the flowers, I noticed that a beautiful black cat was perched in the house's window in front of me, staring at me. I took a picture of it before starting to make my way out. As I stepped onto the concrete, the homeowner exited his house and immediately noticed me. He was a 40-ish-year-old man. "What are you doing?" he asked in a puzzled tone. I explained that I was photographing the insects that were on his flowers. He didn't respond, but awkwardly stared at me. It was pretty awkward, so I walked away and left that cul-de-sac. Once I looked back to find him watching me from his yard. I made a show of photographing some flowers, hoping that he would believe that I was really just out there to take pictures. Since I hadn't seen any cats so far, I decided to walk to another street that often had some lounging about. I should explain here that my cat got eaten by a coyote a few months previous, so petting the neighborhood cats was calming for me. Unfortunately, it seemed that all of the cats were in for the day, which isn't surprising since it was crazy hot out. As I walked back home, I remembered that there was a specific flower I had meant to photograph on that cul-de-sac, so I returned there on my way home. Again, I walked on the side of the street opposite the house where I met the guy, and as I approached the cat house, I noticed that the cat I normally pet was sitting on the sidewalk now. I continued walking towards the cat and waved, calling out his name. A few meters before I reached the cat, the man from before emerged from his house and stormed over to me. I didn't notice him until he called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" He was obviously angry at me, but I hadn't figured out why at this point. He spoke again before I could reply to his first question. "Why are you creeping around my house?" he asked angrily. I'm thinking, damn, this guy obviously misinterpreted my intentions. I turned and replied that I came to pet his cat. I'm really bad with confrontations as an introvert, so this situation made me awkward and less confident than I should have sounded. He didn't believe me. "You were creeping around my house and I ran you off. After I went inside, you came back, so what the hell are you doing?" he asked. This was all quite a shock. I explained that I've been coming here to take photos for years now, of that cat and of other flora and fauna around here. Again, he didn't seem at all to believe me. He asked me where I lived, and I replied that I live one street over. He asked for how long I had lived there, and I said all of my life. He then asked for some form of identification. I rarely carry my wallet anywhere, and today it was at home. He then said, "Let's walk to your house. I want to make sure you live there and meet your parents." Shit. My parents are super chill, but I didn't want my overprotective father to get in an argument with this guy. On a silly side note, I was also quite irked that I had to leave the cat without giving him a pet. I wasn't really worried about this guy knowing where I lived, since I was aware that he was just trying to get proof that I was an actual neighbor, and not a burglar casing his house or whatever he suspected. I led the way, walking silently while fiddling with my camera. He tried to make small talk along the way, but I was too awkward and nervous to contribute much. About 50 yards from my house, he figured that I wasn't bluffing, and actually was leading him to my house. It's also possible that he didn't really want to talk to my parents, since in some ways he now looked like the creepy one, forcing a teenager to bring him to his house and all. He kind of apologized and explained that he was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, then he went back home. So I think the lesson here is that I need to be more careful and to change my behavior, and that not all creepy people mean to be. Also, if you're wondering why I was bold enough to enter his yard, it's because I've been going there to take macro photographs for about 5 years now. Other neighbors have noticed me in their yards petting cats at 11 p.m. before, and I've never had anyone give me a second look. In addition, I had never seen anyone enter or leave the house in the 5 years I'd been coming there, so I never thought it'd be an issue. 2. I'm a college student living with a roommate a few years older than me. If you don't already know, where I live is pretty much a shithole, sans the main university campus. Due to a hyper-vigilant mother, I graduated top of my class in high school, and I basically pay nothing for tuition. There's a catch, of course. I'm a fine arts major, so I'm trying to live as cheaply as possible to avoid massive student loans because, really, it's hard to make it in the arts world. Anyways, I live in a cheap apartment about 15 minutes away from my university. When I say cheap, I mean I pay less than $400 a month, including utilities. With that comes a few downsides. Our dishwasher doesn't work, heater is probably older than my parents, you can see through the brick in my apartment, etc. I've learned the hard way that my downstairs neighbors are into some kinky shit. The usual shitty apartment stuff. My roommate and I have been able to brush things off, but recently, things have taken such a turn downhill. Enough to the point where we ended our lease and I'm moving in with other people next week. It was about a month ago and my roommate was gone at her parents' for the week. I usually relish this time alone. I have a dog, who she does not particularly like sometimes, and I love being able to stretch out on the couch and watch reruns of South Park until we both crash. The entire day, though, I had a horrible, gnawing feeling at the pit of my stomach. I'm not a particularly paranoid person, but there was just something eating at me the entire day. I ended up ditching my last class and taking my dog out as soon as possible. When I was on our nightly walk, I felt that anxiety again, but 1,000,000 times more oppressive. At one point, I turned around and noticed 2 guys in a gazebo in the apartment courtyard. They weren't necessarily doing anything nefarious, just smoking and eyeing me as I made my rounds around the buildings. I ended up cutting my pup's walk short and rushed to my apartment, making sure to lock the door behind me. I'd like to add a tangent here. My apartment is quite odd, think late 1950s, and greatly in disrepair. The locks on our door don't actually function that well. It's hard to explain, but unless you press the door with your foot and shove the knob all the way, it's fairly easy to open the door with just a little finesse. I've complained to management, but they don't really care. They say it's legit. Anyways, I'm super anal about the lock, enough to the point where my roommate and I have had pretty intense arguments over it, or her apparent inability to do so. Tangent over, the door was locked. I made dinner and went to my room and started working on homework on the floor. Again, I was feeling paranoid, so I made sure to lock the door to my bedroom. Thank God I did. Around 10:30 p.m., I was on the phone with a friend, and I heard the front door rattle. My homework-distracted brain didn't recognize this as out of the ordinary. I assumed it was my roommate coming home, until I remembered that she was almost an hour and a half away, chilling with her parents. The door slammed open, scaring my dog enough to the point where he was at my bedroom door snarling, teeth displayed and hackles raised. Then I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps, walking in the living room, muffled slightly by the carpet. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry, and I began to cry and yelled that I was calling the police. The footsteps directed to my room, and my doorknob shook a little as I pressed myself to the door. My friend on the phone even heard this, and hung up to call the cops. At this point, my dog started growling, deeper than I've ever heard before, and started barking non-stop. He's a medium dog, not intimidating by any means, but he sounded 2 or 3 times his size. Even I was taken aback. As quickly as it escalated, it stopped. I heard the footsteps walk back out the front door and the door close again. I think I heard a light jingling. When the police came, they scoped out the apartment and decided that everything was secure and nothing had been disturbed. I actually had to kennel my pup because he was so on edge. Even though the lock wasn't shut completely, they didn't feel the need to file a report, or even stay with me until a friend was able to pick up me and my dog. Luckily, the next day my roommate and I were able to convince the apartment manager to let us leave at the end of the month without paying a fee. This isn't the only incident that's happened at my apartment, but by far the scariest. I've been chased to my door before by a group of guys, and have had bums ask me to buy cigarettes for them. I don't even smoke. But this was the icing on the cake. Since it's happened, I felt so violated and nervous in my own apartment, and I am so extremely fortunate that 2 of my guy friends from high school have an extra room that me and my pup can crash in until the end of semester. This got really long and wordy, so thanks to those who listened to everything. To the creep who broke into my apartment and then got scared away by a 15-pound schnauzer. That's not meat. 3. I'll call myself Clover. For a heads up, I have to mention that I'm a comic artist, and since the time I started posting my own comic online, I got some friends that also make webcomics. Sometimes we stream our drawings so we can interact with each other and some readers. In one of my friend's streams, he popped up. I'll call him Gaki, which means brat in Japanese. The chat was nice and all fun and giggles until he started talking. He came saying he had this fight with a comic artist that I didn't know, and said he was almost having a panic attack. We talked to him to make him feel better, but it was still a bit odd that he would seek help from a bunch of strangers on his stream. He said that the fight triggered his PTSD from a war. I kid you not, he actually said that. He told us a sad story about him being called by the army to stay in a war zone during several months, and he was traumatized by the fact that if he died there, no one would know he died there, since it was a not very known conflict that was going on. I didn't doubt that story, since I know the world has a lot of military conflicts that the international media don't cover much, and I assumed he was from a country that was in conflict with another, having some kind of international conflict. After catching our sympathy, he then proceeded to talk about how he wanted to befriend girls. My friend who was streaming, we'll call her Sparkly, was nice enough to invite him to her Discord server. He was a lot calmer after that, so I asked him what country he was from, since I thought his username had some Italian-sounding name. He said he was Japanese living in the UK, and that his name was in fact Japanese. I won't tell his username because of privacy. Since it was kind of a sentence squished with his actual name, it looked like a name with an Italian-sounding ending like Neo from Antonio or Nis from Diogenes. When he told me he was Japanese, I knew something was fishy. Japanese army can't leave the Japanese territories since the end of World War II. Also, Japanese dudes aren't obligated to enlist their names in the army. It's completely voluntary. I pointed that out to him, and he said that it's only voluntary for girls. I didn't insist much because I thought it wasn't much of a big deal. Also, since my family aren't from the main islands of Japan, I thought that maybe I would have some outdated information or something like that. I know. That lie was a really big red flag. I don't really know why I decided to ignore that, and proceeded to keep a friendship with him. We talked for a while in private chat and private voice chat. His voice was high-pitched. He told me he had a high-pitched voice, and it was kind of an insecurity he had. I know some dudes with high-pitched voices, so I didn't think much of it. He even sent me the messages from the fight he had with the comic artist he mentioned before. The conversation was a bit odd to me. Not that it sounded fake, but she sounded offended and he sounded a bit too invasive. Basically, he was confronting her for not getting on chats with him, and she was of the feeling, why should I justify what I do to you? The thing is, I found that she was being reasonable, but he wasn't entirely wrong, since according to him, he was just really worried about her. The next day, we were chatting on my friend's server with a girl who didn't watch the stream. He told her the whole story about that fight. She is a nice girl, a bit sassy and has a harsh wording sometimes. but that has more to do with a language barrier. I'll call her Shock. Then he asked her to share her library from a comic site. It's a part of a profile you can make in a comic-focused site, where you keep the comics you want to be notified of when it gets updated. As we were chatting, he was commenting on the comic Shock was reading, until he spotted one of the comics from the artist he had to fight with. He asked Shock to remove it from her library since it was causing him uneasiness. That was when it became odd.
Shock, would you remove her comic from your library? Looking at the thumbnail is triggering my PTSD.
Sparkly said, "Skip the page, Gaki. Shock has at least 11 pages of library." Shock said, "It's kind of a big request, dude. I actually like the story, so I won't remove it from my library. Just skip the page like Sparkly said." "Yeah, dude, you're asking a bit too much. That's her library. People's libraries are personal, dude. I know where you were coming from, but that's her library."
Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Sparkly changed the subject, and we started talking about some random stuff, probably sensing some fight was about to start. Then he talked to me privately on my PMs, and that was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. On my PM, Gaki said,
I hope she would look out for me. Was it too much to ask? I feel like a fool for trusting her like that. I'm crying silently.
"What? You're talking about Shock? Dude, you have to understand, she is in her right to keep comics she likes in her library."
I'm not crying with pain anymore, I'm crying with anger. I'm so mad.
Dude, that's too much anger for something so small. I know you're upset, but again, she is in her right to keep her library as it is.
I haven't been this angry since I saw my mom poisoning my cat.
Dude, calm down. Wait, your mom did what now?
There's this voice in my head. It's crawling back to my mind. It's getting louder and louder. I feel myself slipping.
What are you talking about, dude? I know you're mad. You need someone to scream at? I can voice chat with you. You can vent and cuss as much as you want.
He wants to come out and play. Wants to make a big appearance.
Who? I'm lost, bro. Who is this? Is he some kind of split personality of yours?
It's a man inside my mind. He tells me to do messed up stuff.
Bro, stop playing and talk to me properly. You are creeping me out with that story.
Make him stop. I can't stand here so loud.
I got worried and decided to call him on private voice chat. And what I got was half an hour of him crying and screaming while I tried to do what I read on sites about panic attacks. At one small moment he laughed maniacally, then went back to crying. In the end of that madness, I was exhausted and scared.
Thank you, Clover. I almost lost myself to that voice. I'm glad I wasn't alone.
It's okay, bro. I got your back. I was trembling and wishing he would leave me alone for the rest of the day. I needed silence and some sleep after this terrifying experience. He then proceeded to blame Shock for making him go through such a scary experience. I just kind of agreed to everything he said because I wanted to sleep on my boyfriend's lap after that mess. The following day he was talking on chat like nothing happened. I have some other stories about this abusive friendship I had with this guy. This story is really long, so next chapter I'll cover our first fight. Stay tuned, my friends. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 345. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Okay, I'm making some good headway with the next installment of the Jack and Andy Adventures. I did mention I'll be working on that this week. I think I'll put it up on Sunday. I'll put it up as a bonus video on Sunday. Yeah, I usually think that's a good day to put up the extra stuff. So we'll probably get that a couple of hours after the regular Sunday video goes up. I haven't decided what that's going to be yet, though. Maybe Hotel. I think I've got enough for a Hotel. Or maybe Revenge. I'm already gathering stories for the next Neckbeard video, so I think we'll be okay with that. We'll see. And I want to thank you all for all the feedback and the likes and the comments on the recent Neckbeard video. It's always good to see how well those things do. Wish I could do them a little bit more often, but well, I'm still shooting for at least every 2 weeks. So fingers and toes crossed. Well, maybe just fingers, not toes. I don't want anyone to fall over. I don't know what was going on this week, but the Let's Not Meet those stories were hard to find this week. I don't know what was going on, but they were awful hard to find. I suppose it's just one of those slumps that seems to come along now and again. Sometimes I can go there and I can get oodles of them in one sitting, and other times it's slim pickings. Thankfully, the final story was actually a subscriber submission. It's in 3 parts, I believe. I have parts 1 and 2, with part 3 still to come. So that will appear in one of the future videos, possibly the one after that. So maybe by next Monday, part 2, we'll see. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. I'm going to put my feet up and relax for a bit. Maybe watch a film, if I can find one I want to see. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.